Thank you for joining us today. My name is Danielle Larigi. I'm a Senior Developer Advocate here at Salesforce.
Hi everyone, my name is Aditya. I'm also a developer advocate here at Salesforce. Okay, so let's move on to the final topic of today's presentation, which is APIs and SDKs. And as you know, Salesforce has always been pretty much API first. So for every feature that is there in Salesforce, there is a corresponding API, and same is the case with Marketing Cloud as well. So Marketing Cloud offers two types of APIs. One is the SOAP API and the other one is REST API. Pretty much industry standard. Even your core CRM has both SOAP and REST APIs. Almost all the products have these. So these are the two types that we offer. And SOAP API in Marketing Cloud has been around for quite some time. In fact, it was first launched in 2007, which is quite some time ago. And at that time, it was pretty much Email Studio. So SOAP API supports or works predominantly with the Email Studio, whereas REST API is more modern and it supports most of the modern tooling like your Content Builder, Journey Builder, Mobile Connect, and all of these latest tools and technologies that are coming out of Marketing Cloud. The REST API is the one that supports all of these. So because REST API is going to support everything that is coming in new, SOAP API is no longer maintained. It is maintained, but it is no longer extended, which means new features might not come out. But we do support all of the existing integrations that you have with SOAP API, and you can create new integrations with SOAP API as well. But the subset is pretty much limited. Now, there are limits for these APIs, but the limits are a little bit different than that of Salesforce. So in Salesforce, you have per transaction limits and you have an overall limit that is there for the number of APIs that you can fire. But within Marketing Cloud, the limits are more rate based, which means the frequency in which you call the APIs, there is a limit on that. And as a best practice, we recommend no more than 2000 calls per minute for SOAP APIs and 2500 calls per minute for REST APIs, which is quite a lot. I don't see any use case where per minute you're doing 2500 calls to any of the APIs. So you should be good to go. And here is a small table which pretty much sums up what features in Marketing Cloud are supported by the SOAP API and what are supported by the REST API. And as you can see, there is a little bit of overlap between both. So in case you want to send an email, you could either use the SOAP API or the REST API or a combination of both, depending on your own use case. But when it comes to a few things that are related to emails, there is a limited support on REST API and you'll have to fall back on the SOAP API. For example, in case you want to create a new subscriber, create a new data extension, things like that. Data extension is supported in both SOAP and REST. Subscribers is only on SOAP, whereas if you want to work with Journey Builder, Mobile Connect, it's only on REST. So this slide is something that probably would have taken a screenshot by now, but you need not do that because there is documentation that is very robust and it sort of summarizes what are available in each API. So on the documentation for Marketing Cloud APIs and SDKs, you can see a list of all the SOAP web service API objects that are supported. And in a very similar way, you can also see all the different endpoints that REST supports. So whenever you're trying to implement something, just take a look at the documentation to figure out what API you'll have to use to serve the purpose that you're looking for. Now, whenever you want to implement an API or you want to integrate with an API, whether it is with any system, there are 3 steps that you'll have to follow. First one is you'll have to explore all the available API endpoints, which means you need to know what are the APIs that are available to you. And the second step is to authenticate to these APIs. So you need to provide an access token or username password. There are multiple authentication mechanisms. So you need to do that in order to access the API. And once you have that authentication established, then you can call and invoke any of the endpoints that you have. So these are the 3 steps. And we are going to see all of these 3 steps today. So the very first step is for you to explore the APIs. As I've already shown you just 20 seconds ago, There is documentation that is available for you to explore all the different APIs that are available. But as developers, we don't want to just read through the documentation and assume that it works the way it does. We want to try it out. And to make it easy for you to try out all these APIs, what we also have is a Postman collection. So on the Salesforce developers workspace on the official Postman website, you have a bunch of different collections that are available for the Salesforce platform, for Data Cloud, for Commerce Cloud, and very similarly, you have a Postman collection for the Marketing Cloud APIs. So you can click on that and you can see all the different endpoints that we have configured, and you can actually load this into your own Postman app as well. So here I have, this is my local Postman workspace, and I have actually cloned or imported the Marketing Cloud APIs into my own workspace so that I can experiment on them. So within that, what you can see is we have both the REST APIs and SOAP APIs that are available. And for each API, we have different request templates. So what a request template is, basically, if you click on any particular endpoint, the request template is going to show you what the endpoint is. And it also has a sample body or parameter. So whatever is a request that you'll have to send to the endpoint and what is the format of it, there is a sample that is already given to you. And in case you want to see what is the sample response, you can always click on the example below, and it's going to show you what the sample response looks like. So pretty much once you clone the Postman repo or you import the collection, you'll be able to see the basic request templates, the request format, and a response format. So this is good enough. But in case you want to invoke these APIs, like I mentioned, there is step 2, which is to authenticate to these APIs. Now, different systems have different ways in which you can authenticate. So the way you do it in Salesforce is different from the way you do it within Marketing Cloud. So within Marketing Cloud, you need these 3 things in order to get an access token. So the access token is a secret code that is generated, using which you will invoke all of these different endpoints. And to generate this access token, you need the 3 things that I'm showing on screen. The first thing, what you need is a tenant specific endpoint. So what is a tenant? A tenant is nothing but it is your Marketing Cloud instance. So just like you have Salesforce instances, and each Salesforce instance has its own domain, which is what we call the my domain. Within Marketing Cloud, that is what is called a tenant. And if you look at the text in red, that is a unique string or a subdomain for your own Marketing Cloud instance. So you're going to need this, which is a tenant specific endpoint. Now, the advantage with using a tenant-specific endpoint versus a generic endpoint, like let's say auth.marketingcloud.com, is performance. So this endpoint belongs to your own Marketing Cloud instance, which means only you can use it. So the requests coming into this subdomain only come in from your own Marketing Cloud instance, which means it will be more performant because it only caters to your needs and not the needs of every other Marketing Cloud customer. So which is why it is highly recommended you use this endpoint. The second one that you're going to need is an MID. So an MID or an account ID is the ID that is associated with your Marketing Cloud instance. If you have multiple business units in Marketing Cloud, each business unit is going to have its own MID. So depending on which business unit you want to integrate to, you'll have to use the MID or account ID of that particular business unit or Marketing Cloud instance. And finally, you're going to need a client ID and client secret. So this is pretty much in standard with the OAuth web standards that are available out there. So every single vendor, every single API that uses OAuth needs you to use a client ID and client secret. Now, how do you find all of this in your Marketing Cloud instance is what we are going to see. Hopefully, this thing hasn't timed out. So within Marketing Cloud, in the setup, you will have to go to apps and then click on install packages. Now, those of you who are Salesforce developers, install packages in Salesforce shows you the packages that have been installed. But within Marketing Cloud, this tab allows you to create new packages as well. So same terminology, might be a little bit confusing, but just know that go here to create a new package. So we can just click on new, give the package a name, and save. And what it's going to ask you is to add new components. So the component that you add to this package should be an API integration component, which is going to then give you the client ID, client secret, and all of that. So all you need to do is create your package, add a new component, which is the API integration, and click next. Now in the next step, it's going to ask you to choose the integration type, and it gives you three options. So what are these three options? One is whether you're creating a web app or a public app or server to server. So before you come to a choice between these three, you need to know how your integration works. So the first step that you need to understand is whether your integration is working in the context of an individual end user. That means, is it working on the behalf of the end user like me? Or is it a system to system integration, which works on behalf of a generic integration user? So that is the first distinction that you'll need to make. If it is a generic system integration user that you're going to use, then you can go with the server to server type. But if you're going to use a per user authentication, like the integration respects the permissions of every individual user that is logging in and not the permissions of a generic integration user, then you can go with either the web app flow or the public app flow. Now, again, why are there two different flows if it is an individual user login? Now, that is going to depend on whether you have a middleware or not. Now, a middleware is something that is going to sit between your browser and the Marketing Cloud server. So this middleware can be your Salesforce instance, it can be Heroku or MuleSoft or any other middleware of your choice. If you have a middleware like that, you're going to go with the web app flow. If you don't have a middleware and the requests are being sent directly from the browser itself to the Marketing Cloud instance, that is where you're going to go with the public app flow. Now, the reason both of these are different is because of the client secret. So like I mentioned, in OAuth, you have both the client ID and client secret. And in the case of server to server integration or the web app integration, there is like a middleware uh, on which you can store the secret in a secure way. So nobody will be able to look at the secret, which is why both of these flows use the client secret. But in terms of public apps, like a single page web application that you load directly on a browser, you can't use a client secret because anybody with a browser can go do an inspect element on your code and look at the client secret, which is not secure. So which is why public apps don't give you the client secret. Now that is at a very high level the choices that you'll have to make before deciding on what kind of integration that you want. And this kind of integration, if you choose, it's going to come with an OAuth grant type. Now this is something that happens behind the scenes that you need not totally worry about. So what are these different grant types is, for example, here is how the end user flow is going to look like. So the flow where a user logs in and the integration works on behalf of the end user, what's going to happen is the moment you click on, let's say, the button called integrate. So it's going to redirect the user to the Marketing Cloud login page. The end user is going to log in with their credentials to Marketing Cloud. And what Marketing Cloud is going to return is an authorization code saying that so-and-so user is allowing this integration to work. And this authorization code is something that you can use to request for an access token. So this is a two-step process whenever an end user is involved. But if it is a server-to-server integration, because there is a client secret involved, what you can do is you can directly make a call to the authorization server with the client ID, client secret, and it's going to return an access token. So because this is server-to-server integration, there is no end user concept. So it all works on behalf of one single integration user. So at a very high level, that is what it is. So let me just choose server to server for this particular example. And let me click on next.
We have a quick question, Aditya. So one of the questions was, how can they make this secure?
I am going to show you a quick demo to make you understand how to make this secure. After that, maybe if you can elaborate on that question, depending on whatever I have shown you, I'll be able to answer that.
Okay. And just really quickly, Aditya, before we go through, because the questions and comments are going crazy a little bit. So there's a question about, will the recording of today's session be available? It will be available as a LinkedIn post
or on YouTube.
And on YouTube as well. Okay, awesome. And on YouTube as well. So if you want to reference back to this, there will be the ability to refer back to it. There's a question about, can you guide about integration use cases in terms of Marketing Cloud? Like I think LinkedIn user, I'm assuming you're asking about business use cases that would require integration. If that's not correct, then please elaborate more in the chat. But Aditya, is there any context you can give around like a business use case that might require integration?
I can show it in the demo. That is one use case that I came up with. But since we have a lot of people who are working on Marketing Cloud in the chat, maybe they'll be able to guide you on the actual customer use cases. Whatever I'm going to show you is pretty much very hypothetical. So I will defer to the community's best judgment on the chat on actual business use cases.
Okay. And at a really quickly, so the authorization code, there's a question of, will it be unique every time?
Pretty much, yes. It's going to be a cryptographic code, and the authorization code itself is not valid for a longer amount of time. The authorization code is what you use to immediately exchange for an access token, which is valid for a little bit longer time. So the authorization code itself is not going to be your final access token. It's a temporary code.
Okay. And we actually already have Raul in the chat. Thank you, Raul, answering about helping the chat out there on ways that they can make it more secure with encrypted values. And also to LinkedIn user, we'll get back to you a little bit later after the chat about the business use case. Go ahead, Aditya, take it forward. Thank you.
Okay. So once you've selected your integration type, what you need to do is select the scope. The scope as in the permissions. So you've created an integration. The integration user or the end user is able to do certain things using the integration. What do you want them to do? What you should restrict is what you choose over here. So for example, whether you want them to read emails, write emails, send emails using this integration, you choose that. So pretty much kind of like your profiles and permission sets, you define what access you want to give to the integration versus what not. And then you can click on save. Now, how do you decide which permissions to give? So again, in the documentation, there is this REST API, permission IDs, and scopes. So depending on the endpoint that you want to invoke, it actually tells you what are all the permissions that it needs. So depending on these permissions, you'll have to check those boxes. So pretty much look at the documentation. There is no need to learn everything by heart. Depending on your endpoint, just choose the required permission and you'll be good to go. Now, once I have set that integration up, you can see I have a client ID, I have a client secret, and I also have my tenant-specific endpoints that are listed here, both for the REST API, SOAP API, and the authentication endpoints. So pretty much I'm going to get all of that from here. And of course, the MID I'm going to get from the top right corner. So you click on your business unit or your account, and then you're going to see the MID. So everything that you need is going to come in through this particular screen. Now, what you need to do next is you have your Postman collection ready. So within your Postman collection, you go to the variables tab and you configure all those different values that you have just received, like the client ID, client secret, subdomain, and the MID. So you put all of this in the Postman collection and you go to the request SFMC token endpoint. So as you can see, it hits the authorization endpoint. It has a v2/token. That's the address, that's the route. And it has a sample body, and it's going to pick up all the different variables from what you've just configured. Just click on send. And hopefully, if this demo works, it's going to come back with an access token, which it did. And you can see this is the access token that I'll have to use to make subsequent requests. And the most important thing here is the expires in property in this JSON, which tells you when this access token is going to expire. The typical validity of an access token is 20 minutes, but the number of seconds it shows you here is 1080 or 1079, which is close to about 18 minutes. Now, the token itself is valid for 20, but the reason we say it expires in 18 minutes is because we want you to request for a new access token 2 minutes before it actually expires so that your integrations don't break. So that's the reason we slightly reduce the time that we show to you, because your code has to honor this expires in and then automatically request for an access token whenever it expires. Now, the Postman collection itself already has that built in. So if you look at the pre-request script, it actually has all of the logic that actually checks for the token validity, and if the token is valid, it uses the token. If not, it requests for a new token. And it's a best practice to do this because we don't want you to make multiple calls to the authorization endpoint to get an access token each and every time. Like I mentioned, it is all rate limited. And as a best practice, you should not request for more than one access token in a 20-minute duration. So for every request, please don't make an authorization call. Make it once and use the same access token for 20 more minutes. Now, once you have the access token ready, you can hit any of these endpoints. And when I was trying to build this demo, I personally like this particular endpoint, which is called validate email. The reason I found this interesting is because it allows you to validate if an email is correct or not. And not just in terms of syntax, but also whether it is a valid domain. And Marketing Cloud has this feature called List Detective, where it maintains a list of email addresses which might face deliverability issues. So when I sign up on a website and I don't want to give my own email address, I generally put demo@example.com or something like that. Now, those are not valid email addresses. And if you try to send an email to that address, it actually bounces and it reflects badly on your Marketing Cloud account. So this endpoint is handy for you to validate if the email address is valid or not. So you can click on send request, and it actually shows you demo@example.com is invalid because it failed the list detective test. So you're not supposed to have things like this. So instead, if I put like a valid email address, like my salesforce.com email address, and click on send, it's going to return valid true. So typically to validate emails, we use regular expressions, but I found this particular endpoint to be even more robust in terms of validating email addresses. And this is how you do it on Postman. So a very basic example of how you make a call out. And that brings us to the third step, which is invoking the endpoints. And one way to invoke the endpoint is what I've shown you in Postman. But in your projects, you will only use Postman to explore the endpoint, but in your implementations, you will have your own code that you write. So depending on the programming language that you choose, or depending on the system that you choose, there are different ways in which you can invoke these endpoints. But today, I'm going to talk about the SDKs that we offer. So an SDK is nothing but a wrapper on top of the APIs for all the different programming languages that are listed here. So if you were to take the actual endpoints and write all of the code yourself, it would take you a lot of time to do that. But with this predefined code, what we give you is the SDK. You just install the SDK. It has all the required wrappers. It has all the required authentication mechanisms, everything that is built into it. You can think of it like a predefined code sample. You can use that code sample and integrate with the same APIs. But nobody is stopping you from using the raw endpoints and writing your own logic. So this is just to speed up your development process. And the best part about these SDKs is these are community supported projects, which means they're open source. You can take a look at all of the code that is available on GitHub. The second point is you can contribute back to it as well. So you're working with it, you're working on bigger projects, and then you notice small bugs that are there in the SDK. You can always raise issues and contribute your own fixes back to the repo so that the larger community can benefit from it. So that's the advantage that we have with the SDKs. And I'm going to show you a very quick demo of the Node.js SDK. The reason I chose Node.js is I have come up with a random hypothetical scenario where you have a public facing website on which you are asking people to register their interest. So there's a field for name and email address, and you want to do two things. You want to validate if their email address is correct, and you want to create a subscriber in Marketing Cloud. So that's the kind of a use case. And I have built this using Lightning Web Runtime and Lightning Web Components. And Lightning Web Runtime happens to be like a Node.js project, which is why I have chosen to use the Node.js SDK of Marketing Cloud. So the first and foremost thing that you'll have to do is install the SDK. So if you look at the package.json, again, I'm not going to dive deep into Node.js because it's a session on its own. You'll find the recordings on YouTube. So first things first, you need to install the dependency or the SDK. Here it is, SFMC Node Fuel SDK. Once you install that in your JavaScript code, you need to import the SDK, and then you need to initialize the SDK. So in the initialization, what you're going to supply is the client ID, client secret, and your tenant-specific endpoint, and the MID. So all the four things that we configured in Postman have to be sent as parameters whenever you're initializing the client. Now in Node.js, it's a best practice to not hardcode all of these, but rather store them in environment variables. So I've created an environment file where I have all of these, and I'm referring to that within the code. So as you can see, with pretty much 3 statements, I'm able to import the SDK, authorize to the SDK. Now next, I just need to make a call out to the specific endpoint. So here is a very simple call out where I'm using the REST client within the SDK and making a post request. Because if you see in Postman, the validate email is a post request. So I'm doing that. I'm invoking the post request. Here is the endpoint to which I'm making the post request. And here is the body. The exact same thing that we have seen in Postman, we have done here. And I'm trying to get the response back and show it to the user. So if I go ahead and if it is a@example.com and I click on validate email address, it should ideally return false. And if I give a valid email address, it should return true. Now that was invoking the REST client. But what about SOAP APIs? Like I said, if you want to create a subscriber in Marketing Cloud, REST doesn't support it, but SOAP does. But the SDK bundles both REST and SOAP together. So there is another endpoint that I've created to create a subscriber. And here, if you look at the logic, we are using the same client that we have created. And we are creating a subscriber. So the subscriber takes in certain properties like the email address, what is their name, and the subscriber key, which I'm generating randomly. So I'm passing that information. I'm saying client.subscriber.post because, again, creating a subscriber is a post request. And then I'm getting certain result back. Now I can go ahead and do that, for which let me go to the network tab. And I say create subscriber. And it might take some time, but the subscriber gets created successfully. And if you go to the network tab, you can actually look at the results that have come back from the API. It said it's created the subscriber, and this is the ID of the subscriber. This is a subscriber key, and these are the fields that I have sent. So now if I go into Marketing Cloud, I'll be able to see that a subscriber has been created. So to answer your question, one of the use cases is this, where you have a form which you have not built using Cloud Pages. You have built it on an external website using an external framework. Now, how do you integrate that with Marketing Cloud? You're going to use the APIs to do this kind of an integration. So that's one potential use case that I found using which I built this demo. But like I mentioned, you can check the chat for the veterans in Marketing Cloud to tell you what other use cases are there to use the APIs. Now, this is one way of doing it. Like I said, these SDKs are provided on most popular programming languages, but some of us on the call are Salesforce developers as well. So I have written a bunch of Salesforce code for it. The org is not launching, but not to worry. So what we are doing here is we created an Apex class that actually does the same callout using the same use case. So assume instead of hosting this page on LWR, you have hosted it on Experience Cloud Communities. There is a native integration between Salesforce and Marketing Cloud that we recommend. But if you want to use the API route, this is how you'll have to do it. Pretty much, you're going to create a named credential And within the name credential, if you have read our latest blog posts, there is a new version of name credentials that has come out that lets you store tokens in a secure way using external credentials. Again, not going to dive deep, but all the tokens are stored in a secure way within Salesforce, not using custom labels, not using custom metadata types, but using name credentials. So your client ID and client secret are going to be stored within those external credentials, and you're going to use them within your code. And here I'm constructing a pretty basic request to get the authentication token or the authorization token, which I'm going to then store in a platform cache. Now, the Node SDK was implementing all the retry mechanisms, but within Salesforce, you'll have to implement it all by yourself. Like I mentioned, make a request once, use the same access token for 20 minutes. So the best practice to store access tokens and retrieve them in a faster way is to use partitions, the cache partitions that are there. So I've put that in the cache. And here is my logic to check if the token has expired or not. If it is expired, I'm making a new call to get the access token. If not, I'm using the same cached access token. And here is again the Apex code using which I can make a call out to the validate email endpoint. And I'm going to get the response back and show it. And of course, I can invoke this using execute anonymous. So if I invoke and everything works correctly, it's going to show me is valid true because the email address that I've supplied is valid. And this is how you integrate it with Salesforce. Again, this is supposed to be like an overview. So I've only gone through things at a higher level. Later on, we'll probably write a blog post or make a more detailed video on YouTube on how you can actually do this integration. So with that, we've pretty much come to the end of our session. I'm just going to talk about limits pretty quickly. The rate limitation is what I mentioned. If you make too many requests within a particular time frame, then you're going to get this error that is 4 to 9 too many requests. And for the authentication layer, there is a limit. None of these limits are documented. Based on the performance of your own Marketing Cloud instance, we will try to limit the request. If we think performance is going to take a hit, we are going to stop your request. If not, we are going to let your request go. So you won't find anything sort of documented around what is the hard limit. So respect the expires in, and as a best practice, don't make more than one access token request every 20 minutes. And for the service layer, that is your individual endpoints, each service has its own rate limitation. Again, nothing very documented. If performance is hit, we are going to stop. So what you'll have to respect here is just very similar to the expires in property. We are going to send in a retry after property if we think we are getting too many requests. So you'll have to stop making calls to those endpoints for these many number of seconds. So that you need to keep in mind when implementing your own logic. Respect the 4 to 9 too many requests response that you're going to get back, and respect the retry after header. So with that, we are pretty much towards the end of the session. We will wrap up with a quick poll. And thank you for staying on for like 10 minutes more than what we are supposed to. But I want to test if you had a keen eye when looking at the demos. So I've shown you the Salesforce developers Postman workspace, and I told you there are a bunch of different collections that we have. How many collections are there? How many different collections are we offering currently on the Salesforce Postman workspace? So please put your answers in the chat. And Daniel, do we have any questions?
Yes.
Okay.
So there was one question about what if someone uses a temporary email to bypass the validation? I think that was way back when you were doing the authentication.
So it is, again, if people want to game the system, they can. We can put as many roadblocks that we want. But validate email is one such roadblock that I found. If they still want to bypass, they can using some other techniques. But Marketing Cloud List Detective, I hear, is pretty robust and can handle all those exceptions.
Okay, and we have some answers coming in for you about how many we have in our Postman collection. So some people are saying 5, some people are saying 3.
If the
We
answer
have
is
6.
if the answer
We
is
have,
not 7, it's not correct.
there is no 7 in here.
Yeah, pretty much. So
we
if
have
you go back, you can see we have 7 different collections for all the different products that we have, like Platform, Commerce Cloud, Pardot, Tableau, B2B, D2C. So explore this. This is a very rich collection, and in fact, we are number 1 on the Postman. What do we call it? Postman API marketplace. So the number of forks that we have for platform APIs is actually the number 1 in the industry. Twitter is the next, which is way behind us. So thank you for all the forks.
Okay, and we're going to take our last question. So the last question that we're going to take is, Aditya, how were you able to launch a LWR site on a local host?
Okay,
That might be another stream.
yeah, that's pretty simple. It's a very simple Node.js project. On a local host, you can just do npm run dev and it runs. Like Daniel mentioned, spinning up an LWR website, running it locally, integrating with third parties can be their own standalone sessions, which we will post on YouTube. I think there are code live streams that are already planned for that.
Okay, and we have Akash in the chat. Which link are you wanting Aditya to share with you? Is it the Postman collection link?
All the resources that we have given him, he can just share it in the chat.
Oh no, it's a different Akash.
Okay. We are going to share all the links in the comment section of the LinkedIn post using which you joined the stream. So you will find the information on there as well. But Google for it. All of this, even I found it on Google itself. So
we're putting together trailhead links and tons of documentation. We'll post it underneath the LinkedIn post that this is going to make after we're done streaming.
Yep.
And we're getting some thank yous and appreciation for a wonderful session. Thank you. We want to thank you all for joining us and being so interactive and asking us great questions and keeping us on our toes. We love the participation. All right. And so I think
Thank
we
you
just want
to all the wonderful people who've been answering the questions on the chat as
Yes.
well. So thank you.
And we are finished our stream. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And hope to see you in another stream. And in fact, there is a data cloud session that is happening towards the end of the day. I'm doing it on a community website called Apex Hours. So they have their own YouTube channel and their own LinkedIn live stream. So if you're interested to know about data cloud, please join me at 7:30 p.m. IST, that is tonight, whichever time zone that is in from where you are.
Awesome. You know, I love Data Cloud.
Oh, yeah.
It's one of my favorites. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.